So before I get started, I want to give you a little bit of background on kind of where I come from and how I ended up at FanDuel. So I started out as a product marketing manager and lead generation manager, and then I kind of moved over into the B2C digital strategy space. And I started working for a company called the Charity Network that specializes in helping nonprofits raise money through sweepstakes and through auctions. And what's kind of interesting about sweepstakes and auctions is that unlike traditional e-commerce platforms where the customer comes and they give you money and they purchase a good and then they receive that good, with sweepstakes and auctions, they come and they purchase the idea of receiving a good. So you're kind of trying to market to people who are taking a risk with their money. So how I ended up at FanDuel was I actually, the job was posted in Women of Email, and I know that's like the 15th thousand plug for that organization, but I can't say enough good things. And I started to talk to the team, and what I realized is there was this huge breadth and depth of data that would allow us to customize our communications experience for these users and really focus on providing users who may not win with a positive experience. And this role was new to FanDuel. They had never had someone who focused on life cycle. So what I wanted to start with was focusing on retaining new customers. So what I'm going to talk to you today is some of the challenges that we faced when we were starting. Then I'll talk about how we did that data analysis to understand what the customer behavior was. Then how we applied that information to building out our journey, how we worked with our finance team, our legal team, and our product team, and our analytics team in order to map out that journey and make sure that we were connecting all of the dots in the way that they needed to be connected. I'll go over really briefly what our communication structure was, and then we'll talk for a second about the results. So starting with the challenges, much like financial services, daily fantasy sports is a very heavily regulated industry. So we have several organizations that tell us how we can market, who we can market to, and in some cases, when they need to be marketed to. These regulations vary from state to state. So for instance, the way that I would market to someone in New York would legally have to be different than how I market to someone in Texas or Georgia. So geo-targeting was a huge concern for us. We needed to be able to deliver the right information to the right people in the right states. Not only that, because daily fantasy sports is only available to people who are 18 and up in most states, we need to make sure that the users were age appropriate. And in some states like Maryland, they require them to be 21 and up. So to get all of that information, we actually need the people to verify their identity whenever they log onto the site. So even before they get to experience the value proposition, there's a ton of friction in the product. And ultimately, that fell onto the marketing department to capture all of that data and deliver the appropriate message. At the time we were starting this program, our growth and acquisitions team was just crushing it. They were like killing their targets. They were beating acquisition forecasts. They were doing an excellent job. But when we started looking at these customers, what we noticed is that they weren't necessarily converting at the same rate that they were last year. For us, a conversion looks like making your first paid entry into a daily fantasy contest. Not only were they not converting into paid contests at the same rate as last year, they also weren't playing as much, and they weren't continuing to play for at least 4 weeks, which is something that they had done in the last year. At the same time, we were doing this. Sports betting became legalized in New Jersey, so naturally, being a daily fantasy sports company, we were like, oh, sports betting, this is a natural progression. We're going to jump on this. So we had to account for that as well. We also only had a short runway to do this. So when we started working on this project, it was June, and we needed to have it fully tested and rolled out, ready to go before NFL Week 1. So we only had 2 months to build the program, test it, and then roll it out completely. So we started by doing a data analysis. FanDuel's really fortunate in that we have a pretty large team of very, very talented data analysts. So what we started with was we looked at the group of successful customers. For us, these were people who were active for 4 weeks after their first paid entry. From there, we did a regression analysis and determined that the things that they had in common they completed that initial funnel within 7 days. So that means that they did all of those things. They verified their identity, they deposited, they made a first paid entry, and they did all of that in the first 7 days from registration. During that time, they also entered at least 2 to 3 contests and won at least one of those contests. We looked at some of the things that customers might do within the product that wouldn't necessarily be part of what they do with a transaction or what they do inside of their communications. And we saw that they were using live scoring. So essentially, they would enter a contest, then the game would start, and they would pull out their phone, go to the FanDuel app, and check to see what their score was in the contest that they had entered. So 80% of the customers who retained were using live scoring. They also engaged with us even when they weren't playing. So we looked at things like app opens, page views, things like that to determine when we needed to get customers to come back on to our site or log back on to our app. Armed with that information, we started by building our journey. And what I ended up with was this absolute disaster of Post-it notes on the wall in the conference room. And at the time, I had only been at FanDuel for about a month, so they just thought I was like some eternal sunshine on the spotless mind weird girl that they brought in from Texas to come and do their marketing. But what this was we accounted for every possible combination of experiences that a customer could have when they come onto the site. And from that, we used weighted averages to determine what customers were most likely to experience, and that allowed us to take off about 80% of those Post-it notes. And then it became suddenly much more manageable, way more easier. And looking back, I kind of wish I had just started with the weighted averages and looked at what are customers most likely to experience, and then kind of lumped in fringe cases with dynamic content. But this was how we started. It was a process. It worked. And then from there, we started to work with other teams. So at the same time we were rolling this program out, we were also completely revamping the UI of the product for NFL. So our product team was working on a new customer sign-up flow. They were working on a new lobby experience. So basically when someone logs in, they see a lobby full of contests. That totally changed from just a list of contests to a Netflix display, which I think you'll see later in this presentation. And we were also launching this communications program. So what we ended up with was a total of 9 different possible experiences that a customer could have when they logged onto the app. And it was really important for us that we understand what was actually driving change. So we worked with these teams to build out test groups for the 9 possible combinations. And what this taught us is that the communications, the data structure, and the product experiences are inextricable. And if I could talk, I'd be able to pronounce that. But together, they made one the master of marketing. And full disclosure, when I was making this presentation, I was listening to binge mode Harry Potter, so I was in a very different mindset, which is why you've got the Deathly Hallows symbol. So we combined those 9 possible experiences and aligned our data across different departments so that we understood the journey from a more user level. These are the things that we had to account for. So you can see this is what our new lobby looked like. How we decided to handle our legal requirements, like making sure that we're telling new customers how to look out for sharks or how to identify contests that might be better for them, was creating this beginner tip section. So what's really neat is through working with product, we were able to extend what was happening in our communications into the product lobby and incorporate new user experiences. From that, our onboarding experience was not just in the product. We also used interstitials, emails, push notifications, and a training track that we developed for customers who we deemed to be at risk for not retaining. This is what our program looked like. So on day 1, we decided to focus on alleviating some of those barriers to conversion that users might experience. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see our welcome email. There's actually 20 different variations of this, so this is just one of them. At the top, we've got the progress bar. So we pulled that from our new sign-up flow, and what we found is that this was incredibly effective at getting customers to move through the product. This actually wasn't sent until the day after they had registered, and they were still engaging with this progress bar. We wanted to make sure they were downloading the app, and then whether or not they had verified their identity, we would deliver different content at that time. And if they had deposited, we would either tell them about paid contests or we'd tell them about free contests. Our idea was we just want you to experience the fun of playing daily fantasy sports. On the right-hand side is an example of what our training track looks like. So through that data analysis that we did at the beginning, we discovered that there was like a threshold where customers kind of started to drop off, where if they had a win rate that was less than a certain percentage, the likelihood that they would continue to play after their first week was incredibly low. So to kind of mitigate this risk, we decided to look at their win rate starting on day 3. So if they got to day 3 and they hadn't entered a contest or they hadn't won a contest, we would tell them things like, here's how you be better at daily fantasy sports, without telling them that they were being bad, because no one wants to know that they're not good at something. And then on day 5, we would deliver other tips. So basically trying to expose them to all of the things that we knew made our really, really skilled players very skilled, and sharing that information. Then on the last day, we would send this email, which was a free contest entry where they had the opportunity to experience a win, and we would cover the cost for them. So at this point, they're already playing. They haven't necessarily won. We know that the likelihood that they'll retain is probably pretty low, but we still want them to experience that feeling of winning. So the last stage of our training track was to get them into this contest. Being able to work with product to make sure, and operations, to make sure that these contests were live at the same time was something that took a lot of cross-functional work for us, but in the end, it really paid off. We also had some in-app communications. We really wanted to focus on building a feedback loop. So we would send notifications whenever contests they entered were opening, so after they locked and that game was starting, we would go ahead and send them a push notification. And then when that contest settled, meaning they needed to come back and see if they won, we would send them a push to make sure that they came back into the app. We would also send them those re-engagement pushes. So if customers weren't coming back and opening the app, or they weren't coming back and they weren't using live scoring, we would try and get them back in so that they could continue to exhibit that behavior that builds stickiness, that builds habits. And we also kind of wanted to make them feel good about winning, because that's a big deal, especially for new users, to come in and right out of the gate experience that value proposition, experience the excitement of seeing money in your account. So we did establish winner communications. So we had a push notification that would tell them that their contest had settled. They'd come back into the app, and we'd show them an interstitial that said, congratulations, you won. And once they hit see my score, it would push them to the screen where they see their contest score. What that resulted in, all of that, was a 30% increase in open rates, an 81% increase in click-to-open rates, and a 40% conversion into paid contest from contextual communications. Ultimately, when we looked at those base analytics, things like our customers depositing, our customers making an entry into a paid contest, we saw that there was really only a 1% left, and I had this complete existential crisis. I thought about leaving my job, going to live in a cabin in the woods. I didn't know what I was doing. And then we looked at what's the value of what these customers are doing. And we saw that there was actually a 207% ROI for these customers. So while they maybe only 1% more of them were depositing, they were depositing more money. They were making more paid entries. They were entering more contests and coming back to the app more frequently than users who didn't go through this program. And they led to a 207% ROI with customers. Some of our key learnings from this were that, unsurprisingly, progress bars are really effective. We get customers to come back. It was the most engaging piece of any of our communications that we sent out. So making sure that we pulled that in from our sign-up flow into our communications was really important for us. We also learned that contextualizing our communications made them feel more personal and drive increased engagement. And to us in the room, that's really not anything of note. But what this did for us was allow us to take this data back to product and tell them, like, look, we've got the data to prove that the more that we can leverage these things inside of the product, the more that we productize the pushes or the emails that come out, we'll be able to drive better conversions. So this helped us change the way that we build products at FanDuel. We also learned that all of that upfront work to unify that data and make sure we were matching up those 9 different test groups was totally worth it, because then we were able to identify which pieces were really moving the lever for us. And we learned that absolute metrics are not a good indicator for success when it comes to personalization. So looking at things like number of people who are depositing may not be as valuable as looking at someone and saying, like, what's the value of what you're doing? This was a big turning point for us. So this program was the first that FanDuel had ever done that incorporated this level of personalization. And through our work with the finance team, the legal team, the product team, and our communications team, we've completely changed our perspective on how we're building things. So now we kind of operate as a hub where we have cross-functional meetings. The way that we develop our products is more personalized. And we've been able to expand the voice that marketing has inside of our organization to really shape the way that our product is built, but also the things that our customers experience. And now, I think when we look at these things, we see that the communications are an extension of the product themselves. Armed with all of this information, we're really focusing on getting down to user level information. And I'm really excited about the direction that it's going, and I think we're just getting started.